Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really vital if you're a renter. The lease period. Those dates, the details, they can be confusing, sometimes even seriously risky. Yeah, you sent over some fascinating sources highlighting exactly where things can go sideways with lease durations. So our mission today, let's cut through it all. We'll pull out the most critical stuff, the essentials you need to know to protect your right to live where you live, and frankly, avoid some nasty surprises.
Absolutely. It's so easy to just glance at the start and end dates on a lease and think,
Oh.
okay, got it. But, well, these sources make it incredibly clear those dates are just the start. They're the bedrock of your rights, your stability, even your financial safety, really.
Mm-hmm.
And the materials you sent give us this really vivid, almost painful example of how quickly that foundation can just, feel like it's crumbling if you aren't careful.
Right. So, okay, before we the real world case study shows you exactly why this stuff matters so much. We're talking about Puss and this 6-month battle she had when her lease got cut short unexpectedly. So let's set the scene. We're in Taipei, prime spot, right near the metro, super desirable area. Our tenant, Bah, she's 28, product manager, doing well, wants a better commute.
Makes sense?
And she finds this place managed by EasyRent. They're pushing convenience hard, one-time payment, utilities included, housekeeper service, the whole package.
Sounds appealing.
It does. And the owner, this EC, lives abroad. He's basically just handed the whole building management over to EasyRent. Okay, so step one, signing the lease. Loves the location, perfect for work. She's tired of waiting lists for public housing, so she decides fast. Forget waiting, signing for 2 years. That's the quote.
She committed.
Yeah, she looks at the contract, says 2 years, looks totally legit.
Okay, and the specifics on that contract. It was a 24-month lease, right? Starting March 1st, 2025, running through February 29th, 2027. Rent was 32,000 NT a month, included the management fee.
Sounds standard.
Pretty standard, yeah. And Easy Rent reassured her, oh yeah, we've got formal authorization from the owner. You're set for the full 2 years. But here's the first, major flag the sources point out. Being busy didn't ask to see the original agreement, the actual contract, the ocho, between Easy Rent and the owner.
Ah, okay, so she just took their word for it. Fast forward 15 months, she's settled in, things are fine. And then, step 2, the bombshell. September 1st, 2026.
Right.
A message comes through EasyRent, but it's from the owner. It says, the owner's contract with EasyRent is ending, like today.
Wow, that abruptly.
Exactly. And Wang is coming back, wants to renovate the place, wants to live there. So, she's got to move out. Now.
Oh, man. Just imagine getting that news. She thinks she has another 6 months left on her lease.
Yeah.
And the sources really emphasize the financial hit this meant for her.
Right. It wasn't just inconvenient.
No. She'd already invested money or signed up for things based on staying 2 years. Maybe small improvements, furniture on payment plans, definitely those 2-year internet and phone deals we all get locked into.
Pass those contracts.
Moving early means breaking those, paying penalties, real money out of her pocket. And EasyRent's brilliant solution, hey, we've got another place for you.
Oh, good.
But it's $35,000 a month now, and it's further away. Not exactly helpful.
Yeah, not helpful at all. So this kicks off step 3, the fight, the negotiation. But Heaton, she doesn't just pack her bags. She starts digging. She does her homework.
Smart move.
And this is where she uncovers the absolute key legal point that these sources hammer home. A sublease, like the one she had with EasyRent, legally cannot go beyond the end date of the main contract between the agency and the actual owner.
That's the crucial bit.
And if it does go beyond that date, that extra time might just not be binding on the owner. And critically, her contract with EasyRent, it never mentioned this risk. Never disclosed that their own lease might end sooner.
Right. So armed with this knowledge, she didn't just complain. She made specific demands. The sources list 3 things she really pushed for.
Okay, what were they?
1, find a way for her to stay until her original end date, February 29th, 2027. And if that caused renovation delays for the owner, well, the owner or EasyRent should cover those losses.
Bold text.
2, if staying wasn't possible, if she absolutely had to move, then they needed to cover all her costs. Relocation expenses, any difference in deposit for a new place, and crucially, those penalties for breaking her phone, internet, furniture contracts, all that stuff.
Makes sense. She wouldn't have those costs otherwise.
Exactly. And 3, she wanted a compensation just for the broken promise itself. 1 month's rent as a penalty for them not guaranteeing the lease term they promised her.
So how did the owner respond to that?
Well, the owner's initial offer was less than impressive. Basically, Here's 10,000 NT dollars for your trouble.
Seriously,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. So deadlock,
Oh.
obviously.
Which brings us to step 4, getting it sorted. She didn't just argue back and forth, she took formal action. Filed a complaint with the local consumer protection officer.
Using what grounds?
Citing Civil Code Section 227, the bit about incomplete performance, basically. They didn't deliver the full 2 years they contracted for. And she also used the consumer protection law, arguing they failed to disclose vital info, specifically that underlying contract end date.
Smart. And she didn't stop there.
Nope. She also initiated mediation through the official Real Estate Dispute Resolution Committee, really using the system.
And this is where Easy Rent probably started doing some math, right? The sources suggest they looked at the potential hit to their reputation, their brand image, versus the cost of settling this.
Yeah, bad publicity costs money, too.
Exactly. So the final agreement reached through mediation was a compromise. Burkett got to stay until December 31st, 2026.
Okay, so that was an extra 4 months from when they first told her to leave.
Right. Still short of her original full 2 years, but much better than being out on Sep 1st. Plus, she got a relocation subsidy of 25,000 NT dollars.
Better than 10,000.
Much better. And she got her last 2 months' rent refunded as compensation.
Wow. So, okay, she didn't get the whole 2 years back, but by pushing, by knowing her rights, by using the system, she seriously cut her losses and bought herself crucial time.
Precisely. In this case, like you said, it's not just a story. It's the perfect foundation for understanding the real risks renters face, the things you need to watch out for.
Okay, so let's unpack those lessons. Let's turn a tough experience into actionable stuff for our listeners. You mentioned the sources identify these risk notes.
Yeah, exactly. Critical points where things often go wrong for tenants.
Sure.
And the first one, the absolute biggest takeaway from Samia's situation is risk node 1, not verifying the mother contract end date. In Chinese, annuities, failure to check when the agency's own lease with the owner actually ends.
Right. This seems like the absolute #1 thing the sources are shouting about. Before you sign anything, you have to ask to see proof. Get a copy, get a photo, something of the agency's contract with the owner. Don't just, trust their verbal assurance.
Because if you don't, the cost is potentially huge, just like we saw. Your lease gets cut short, you're scrambling, you're paying penalties on other contracts you signed thinking you were secure. It's a mess.
And the cost of fixing it after the fact, the xuni, as the source calls it, it's enormous. The stress, finding a new place, moving, the money lost, the sheer energy spent fighting it, it's way more costly than just asking for that one document up front.
Definitely. Okay, risk node number 2. The contract doesn't disclose the agency's lease term.
Oh.
Your sublease agreement with the agency, just wixed, doesn't mention when their right to rent the place actually expires.
So the action here seems pretty straightforward. Insist on it. Demand a clause right there in your contract that clearly states, mother contract end date is YYYYYYMMDD. Get that specific date in writing.
Yep. Because without it, the cost is confusion and disagreement. It just becomes a he said, she said situation later if there's a problem. Well, they never told me. Well, you never asked. It makes proving you were misled much, much harder without needing formal mediation or even legal action.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
Risk node 3, lack of backup plans in the contract. Your lease doesn't say anything about what happens if the agency or owner terminates early. No guarantee of renewal, no requirement for them to help you find a comparable place.
Right, no safety net. So the advice here is to try and add a clause. Something like, if they end the lease early, they have to either find you a similar place nearby or compensate you for the difference in rent or hassle.
Exactly. Try to build that protection in. Because the cost of not having it, you could be forced to move somewhere inconvenient, maybe much further away, or face a big jump in rent just to maintain a similar standard of living.
And without that clause, your only option is tough negotiation after the fact, or trying to demand penalties, which can be difficult.
Very difficult. Okay, final one from this list. Risk node 4, getting tied down financially. Hip show, things like your deposit being hard to get back quickly or being locked into installment plans for furniture or minor renovations that penalize you if you move early.
Yeah. So how can tenants avoid that trap? The sources suggest things like maybe using a deposit trust account, if that's an option, or choosing short-term furniture rentals instead of buying on long payment plans, or just focusing on stuff that's easy to move.
Precisely. Think about flexibility. Because the cost of getting this wrong is just more financial pain on top of the stress of moving. Paying penalties on furniture you can't easily take or don't need anymore. It just adds insult to injury.
And the remedy, if it happens, try to negotiate. Argue that since they forced the early move, they should absorb those penalty costs, or maybe even buy the fixed items from you.
It's worth a try. Now, the sources also frame some advice using like business strategy terms, which I thought was interesting, applying professional concepts to being a tenant.
Oh, like what?
Well, first, due diligence. Basically, do your homework on your landlord or agency, just like a business vets a partner.
So for a tenant, that means really doing your own know your counterparty check, finding out if the agency actually has the right to rent to you, and crucially, for how long. Seeing that main contract as part of your due diligence.
Exactly. Then there's risk disclosure. Well, sure. The sources argue that the mismatch between the agency's lease end date and yours is a major risk. It's something that absolutely needs to be disclosed upfront, in writing, ideally with penalties attached if it impacts you.
Makes sense. Don't hide the potential problems.
And this leads to contract risk transfer.
LMAO.
This is about using clauses in your lease to push the risk back onto the agency or owner
How so?
by insisting on things like a guaranteed renewal option or a specific early termination compensation, amounts payable by them if they break the lease term. You're making it financially risky for them to disrupt your tenancy.
Shifting the burden back. I like it.
And finally, something we touched on but is worth repeating. Digital evidence management. Keep records. Use official channels like email or platform messages for important communication. Save screenshots. Save PDFs. Cloud storage is great for this. This digital trail is invaluable if a dispute arises.
Absolutely crucial. Okay, let's broaden out a bit from a specific case. The sources cover some other really important legal points and practical tips every renter should know.
Yeah, definitely.
Like this 30-day red line concept they mention. What's that about?
Ah, yes. This is critical. Under Taiwan's main rental law, the Lease, Housing Market Development and Management Act and standard contracts, a proper residential lease has to be for a minimum duration of 30 days.
30 days, minimum. Okay.
If you're renting a place for less than that, like daily or weekly,
Yeah.
it legally falls under different regulations, basically hotel or short-term lodging rules. And that requires a specific business license.
So if someone's renting out an apartment by the week without that license,
It's likely an illegal operation. And the big impact for you, the tenant, is that you lose all the protections of standard residential rental laws. They could potentially hike the price dramatically overnight or kick you out with very little notice. Plus, safety standards, insurance, it might all be different and potentially inadequate for a resident.
wow. So watch out for listings advertising daily rent or weekly rent unless you're sure they're licensed for it.
Definitely a red flag for residential purposes.
Okay. The sources also make a clear distinction between periodic and non-periodic leases. Can you break that down?
Sure. A periodic lease is the most common type. It has a fixed start date and a fixed end date spelled out clearly in the contract. Your right to live there runs until that specific end date.
And ending it early usually requires agreement or specific legal reasons, right? The landlord can't just change their mind halfway through.
Generally, no. They're bound by that end date, barring specific circumstances laid out in the law, like Civil Code Section 450. Now, a non-periodic lease is different. It might be set up without an end date from the start, or more commonly, it's what a fixed-term lease can turn into if you keep living there and paying rent after the original end date, and the landlord doesn't object. This is covered by Civil Code Section 451. It sort of rolls over automatically.
Okay, so what's the practical difference in a non-periodic lease?
The main difference is in how it can be terminated. As the tenant, you can usually leave just by giving notice according to your rent payment cycle, like 1 month's notice if you pay monthly. But for the landlord to terminate a non-periodic lease, they need one of the specific legal grounds listed in Land Law 100.
Such as?
Things like the landlord needing the property back for their own use, or needing to demolish and rebuild, or if the tenant is seriously behind on rent. They can't just end it without one of those valid reasons, otherwise it's a breach of the lease.
So strategy-wise, what did the sources suggest based on this?
Well, if your priority is stability, you generally want a periodic lease. Maybe even try to negotiate an automatic renewal clause. If you need more flexibility, maybe a periodic lease with a pre-agreed, reasonable penalty for leaving early is better. Or know that staying on after your fixed term might convert it to non-periodic, which gives you more flexibility to leave, but also means the landlord could terminate if they have legal grounds.
Good to know the different implications. And let's just circle back quickly to that agency sublease triangle again, because the sources really stress this.
Can't stress it enough. Your sublease with an agency is always limited by the agency's own contract with the actual property owner. It cannot legally extend beyond that main contract's end date.
And the consequence, as we saw with Kira, is being forced out early and facing losses.
Exactly. Which is why the sources are so adamant. You have to ask the agency 3 critical questions and get proof. 1, what is the precise end date of their contract with the owner? See the document.
Don't just take their word.
Never. 2, do they have the owner's written permission to sublease? Verify it. 3, what happens if their term ends before yours? Who guarantees your right to stay and how? Get specifics.
Okay, super practical. What about handling the end of a lease normally? Any tips for lease expiry?
Yeah, the sources suggest being proactive. Don't wait until the last minute, maybe 30 to 60 days before your lease is up. Reach out to your landlord. Ask about renewal, and specifically ask if there will be any rent increase before they bring it up.
Get ahead of it.
Yeah. And if you know you need to leave early from a fixed-term lease, check that early termination clause, see what the penalty is. If there isn't one, talk to your landlord, negotiate. Maybe offer to help find a replacement tenant that often helps smooth things over. Keep records of everything.
And if the landlord wants you out early,
Check their reason against the legal grounds. If it's just, I changed my mind, or I want to rent it to someone else for more money during a fixed term, that's usually not a valid reason. You can likely refuse to move or negotiate for substantial compensation.
good to know you have rights there. The sources also included some quick practical tips. Little practical wisdom tips. Simple but effective. 1, write the end date clearly and precisely. Year, month, day. Use the standard local format, like the ROC calendar year, to avoid ambiguity.
Details matter.
They really do. 2, use technology. Set calendar reminders 90 days out, 60 days, 30 days before your lease expires. Don't let it sneak up on you. Gives you time to think, plan, negotiate.
Smart.
And 3, keep everything. Proof of rent payments, deposit payment, management fees, any receipts for repairs you paid for. These documents are your evidence trail if any dispute arises about your tenancy.
Okay, let's hit a couple of common Q&A scenarios from the sources. What if your landlord sells the building while you're living there? Does the new owner have to honor your lease? Generally, yes. The principle is often called sale does not break the lease, especially if your lease was notarized, or even if it wasn't, but it's a fixed-term lease under 5 years. The new owner usually inherits the existing lease agreement and its terms. They can't typically just kick you out because they're the new owner. Your rights usually carry over.
Okay, good to know. What about the opposite? You need to leave 2 months early on a fixed lease. Can you just tell the landlord to keep your 2-month deposit to cover the rent?
Usually not. That's a common misconception. The deposit is primarily for covering damages to the property or unpaid bills at the end of the lease, not typically as a substitute for rent if you decide to leave early. You need to check your contract's early termination clause. If there isn't one, you're technically still liable for the rent for those months unless you negotiate a different agreement with the landlord or find a replacement tenant they accept. Just walking away and forfeiting the deposit might still leave you open to being pursued for the remaining rent.
All right, so communicate and negotiate. Don't just assume. Okay, last one. Your fixed lease ends. The landlord doesn't say renew, but they also don't say get out. They just keep accepting your rent.
Yeah.
What's the situation then?
That goes back to the non-periodic lease conversion we talked about, Civil Code Section 451. If the term ends and you stay, continue paying rent, and the landlord accepts it without objection, the lease generally converts into a non-periodic one. You can stay, keep paying rent under the original terms, unless legally changed, and the landlord would then need one of those specific land law Section 100 reasons to ask you to leave later. You don't become instantly evictable just because the original date passed.
Okay, that's really useful clarity on common situations.
So yeah, wrapping it all up, understanding these details, the lease period nuances, periodic versus non-periodic, that 30-day minimum, and especially that critical link between your sublease and the agency's main contract. It's not just, boring legal stuff. It directly impacts your life, your stability, your freedom to move, your power if things go wrong.
It really empowers you, doesn't it? Knowledge and documentation. Like the sources kept saying, see the main contract, photograph it, keep records, get compensation clauses in writing before you need them. It's about buying yourself time and security, not just scrambling when a problem hits.
Absolutely. That lease period isn't just ink on paper. It's the boundary defining the security of your home.
And the final thought from the sources is pretty powerful. Master these rules, understand the lease term game, and you gain real leverage. Don't let that end date become a remote control in someone else's hand, ready to disrupt your life on their schedule. Well, thank you for sharing these incredibly insightful sources and walking us through this. This has been a crucial deep dive for anyone who rents. Hopefully, it encourages you listening to maybe take another look at your own lease with these points fresh in mind.
Definitely worth doing. And, thinking about all this, it really raises another important question, doesn't it? What other seemingly minor details, those standard clauses buried in the contracts we sign all the time, might be hiding similarly significant unexpected risks for us?